Hello and welcome to another ICMI video for 2021. These videos are going beautifully. I am enjoying every single one. I am joined here with Vernon, and we have the privilege of talking to Tim Goldich. How are you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing very well. I always really enjoy this sort of thing. I love talking gender politics, so I'm very much in my element and very much enjoying this.
Well, I am very excited for this interview. I mean, you have been doing this for like 25 years.
More than that, even. Yep.
More than that, pretty much before the movement really took hold, and you were there.
Yep.
And what was it like when you first got into it?
When I first got into it, the idea of male victimization had no credibility. It was like men suffered nothing. Men just paraded through a patriarchal paradise of male power and privilege, and there an end to it. There was no awareness of all the ways that men suffer comparison with women in virtually every measure of well-being. Female power remains pretty much unknown. It's like, that's the final hurdle. We have managed to get through the lace curtain the idea that men are victimized. We don't really like it. It doesn't feel good to us, and we reject it a lot, but it is out there nevertheless. Female power is the last hurdle. That's trying to understand that. We understand female senators and CEOs, but those are women that just happen to be wielding a high-end form of male power. We don't understand still female modes of power: beauty power, sexual power, motherhood power, moral authority, the greater power to elicit empathy and inflict shame, many different modes of female power. When we finally come to understand that, then we may finally begin to understand woman as equal partner in the human system. And from there, we can hold women accountable as equal partner in the human system with equal power and therefore equal accountability, equal power and equal abuse of power. That is the goal. That's why I call my book "Loving Men, Respecting Women: The Future of Gender Politics." So by loving men, I'm talking about more empathy toward men. By respecting women, I'm talking about respecting women's power, weaponry, efficacy, equal partnership in the human system, playing an equal overall force of influence in the human system, and therefore equally responsible for outcomes. I'm a purveyor of something we call equalism. And equalism is a new gender-neutral gender politics. And it's all centered around this idea that women and men, the two sexes, are and have always been equal. Not the same, but equal. The two ends of a balance beam need not be identical to weigh the same. This is a big hurdle out there because so many out in gender politics, they cannot conceive of women and men as being equal unless they are identical. And that is what I call 4 = 4 equality. So it's dumbed down so that even an imbecile can comprehend it. If women and men are identical, then it is self-evident that they are equal. But equals MC squared is also true. And these two ends of that equal sign don't even resemble each other, and yet they are equal because they weigh the same. Men and women are equal because they weigh the same. They have an equal overall force of influence in the human system. So equalism is all about something that triggers people massively, and that is it all balances out. So I'll say that again, it all balances out. That means that in the benefits enjoyed, the liabilities suffered, the power, the victimization, the freedoms, the constraints, the joys, the sorrows, good and bad, light and shadow, it all balances out between woman and man, and it always has. How can that be? Well, because, as I see it, men have always been more respected but less loved, women more loved but less respected. That's been the balance in the system. And I believe that woman and man co-created this gender system in co-equal co-partnership because out of the deal, each sex got what it wanted most. So for his particular brand of self-sacrifice, man earned the lion's share of the respect. And for her particular brand of self-sacrifice, woman earned the lion's share of the love. The deal was a contract of sorts, and each sex fulfilled its end. and earned its rewards fair and square. So there's really no basis for all this intersex rage, rancor, resentment, victim, and vengeance poison. If we understand this thing more clearly, we can leapfrog over this enormous contest for MVP, most victimized and powerless. This is a contest that has no resolve. It all balances out. It's not a statement of fact. It's an outlook, a gender political outlook. It's a decision. It's a leap of faith. And if we try and work this contest for most powerless victim, this can go on forever because it's a subjective thing. No one can claim to hold the entire male experience on one side of the brain, the entire female experience on the other, and claim to know with certainty which side is heavier, which is lighter, which is freer, which is more constrained, which is better, which is worse. So that contest can go on forever, and it can have no positive outcome. There's just no way. So as I see it, equalism is about envisioning a day when woman and man might call it even. To sell this idea would sell to the general public. It's not going to probably sell to gender politicians. Gender politicians are going to tend to have their heels dug in, and they're either going to see a world in which women have the power and men are the victims, or they're going to see a world in which men have the power and women are the victims.
So you mentioned, Tim, that, well, when you started out, even before 25 years, you said that male problems were virtually unknown, right? So right. When you were starting, how were you able to gather and address the issues? Was it experience? Was it observation? Or is it just other means of just kind of figuring it out?
Well, the story goes that I met in a group of women, these 5 women, and I was kind of like an honorary member of this group of women, and I was feeling beat up by the feminist rhetoric, and I was feeling like there's got to be another side to all this. And I went looking in the bookstore. In those days, there was a bookstore, and of course there was no men's section, there was only women's section. And I'm trying to find something that would offer the mirror opposite of all this feminism. And such books actually existed, but in their obscurity, I didn't find them. So I found books by Rush Limbaugh and Morton Downey Jr., which for me were more embarrassing than enlightening. They did not really give men a voice in my judgment. So I said, well, if nobody's going to write this book, then by God, I'll write this book. So I spent a couple of years writing it, and then I discovered the myth of male power. A huge bombshell, right? So that did 2 things. That validated my point of view, that made it, I could see that a politicized male perspective was indeed valid and backed up by all manner of objective facts and truths. And on the other hand, I looked at it and went, wow, this is not just my next book, this is my next 3 books right here that he's already written, see. It took a while to find my own niche. Early on, almost nobody got to speak out on men's issues. There was nowhere to go, no forum. Sadly, that really hasn't changed that much. There's still really kind of nowhere to go. If you want to talk men's issues, you're facing a hostile crowd almost anywhere you go. I mean, might get lucky and get accepted out there on stage in front of a bunch of people, but more likely you're going to get kind of lambasted if you try and. I invented equalism in part as a means of trying to get male perspectives through the lace curtain and out into the general public.
Well, certainly today, I mean, we have ICMI, we're doing that. We have found each other on YouTube. So there are opportunities to speak on it. Would you agree with that? Or do you still feel that there really isn't, as you said?
Yeah, well, see, the thing is, yes, there's the male perspectives are out there. It's impossible to know what the percentages are, which is frustrating to me. I don't know what the percentages are. I know that there are a large number of men and women that know men's issues and understand men's issues and understand that side of gender reality, but I don't know what the percentage is. And what I'm still frustrated with is this sort of thing that I'll just sort of call the official gender belief system, which in many ways hasn't budged an inch. is still go on about this pay gap. Doesn't matter how many times it's been discredited. It still goes on about men have the power, women are the victims. It's still just deeply entrenched in academia and kind of everywhere that you might call official. There are sort of underground channels by which we're getting the word out and it's being effective, but it doesn't seem to have made any difference when you read Time magazine or whatever it is. It's the same feminist ideological dictatorship.
I was actually about to ask you how far we've come in trying to get the message of men's issues across, and based on your answer, it doesn't look like things are that much improved. Am I right?
Oh, it's hard to say. Paradigms can shift on a dime. Look at McCarthyism. For a decade, it was all powerful. It was unchallengeable. You were committing suicide to go up against it. It trammeled over human rights and due process, and it was all powerful. And it appeared to be something that just could seem hopeless at the time. Nothing is going to ever topple this all powerful ism, McCarthyism. And then all of a sudden, McCarthy overstepped himself. He went after the military and was there in a congressional hearing that was televised. And Joseph Welch, the lawyer, challenged him with, have you no decency? At long last, sir, have you left no decency? And the whole place went up in applause. And that was it. It pretty much destroyed the credibility of McCarthyism overnight. Something like that could happen in gender politics, and all of this that we've been doing for the last 50 years could contribute to that. You see, it wasn't just that lawyer that did it. It was a multitude of people that kept eroding our confidence in McCarthyism, and the truthfulness of it and the justice of it made it possible for Welch to challenge him in that way, in that moment, and win. On the one hand, it's very frustrating because it seems we haven't budged an inch. And on the other hand, feminism, all powerful, is incredibly vulnerable. Incredibly vulnerable. It's all based on a lie. It's all just based on the lie that men have the power and women are the victims. That's a lie because it's one-sided, and therefore it's false, and therefore it's poisonous. But because it's absolutely foundational to feminism, society must officially at least believe that men have the power and women are the victims. Otherwise, there's nothing that justifies feminism. There's no reason or basis why women should have their own unique ism.
Listening to you talk, Tim, so far in this conversation, and you've said a lot of really great things, but one might think that you're almost negative about the men's movement. So I want to ask you, are you hopeful for the future of men?
I am angry with the men's rights movement, okay? I'll just come out and say it. I think it's shot itself in the foot over and over again in so many ways. It has tended to thumb its nose at the general public. And in my judgment, the general public is the only force on earth that can truly turn things around for us. I understand how the purveyors of the men's movement become embittered. Back in the 90s, we all presented the facts and truths of female power, male victimization, and just tried to say, look, here's the other half of gender reality, and we just got spat upon. I mean, we just got defamed and, accused of all this kind of thing, and death threats. And I mean, it's just a nightmare. So it's understandable the men's rights movement becomes very angry with the general public that has so turned against us. And yet, I think the men's rights movement really needs to get the general public on board if we really want to affect huge change. McCarthyism wasn't taken down because it was unconstitutional, wasn't taken down in courts of law. It was taken down in the court of public opinion. If the general public does not support feminism could immediately becomes a toothless anachronism. This is achievable. I think one thing about the men's rights, it's mired in this sort of hopelessness. It sees this instinctual advantage women have in terms of eliciting empathy. that women elicit empathy, caring, concern, compassion, they're like magnets for that. And men can't draw empathy no matter what. We stand up for 100 years if you count, the fraud of feminism by Eve Balfour Bax from 1913. We've been, screaming, men are 4.5 times as likely to commit suicide, and waiting for the sea to part. It doesn't work. I kind of despair of the men's movement always and forever leading with victim. That I think it's just a strategy that is proven to not work. Insanity, one definition of it is do what you've always done, but expect some different outcome. If we want a different outcome, we really need to change our strategy. And that means acknowledging and allowing women, there's an instinct to love women more, to empathize with women more. But there's also an instinct to respect men more. Men elicit more authority. And we need to believe that. We need to believe that we can't be just shamed into nothingness. We can't just go to pure bitterness about that. We have to believe that this instinct is also profound, deep. It's archetypal. It's primal, and it transcends the current rhetoric and transcends the current misandry. And we need to believe that because all our true gender political weaponry derives out of what, like Jordan Peterson models, a masculinity that demands a masculine authority, intellectual authority, and moral and ethical authority.
So in that case, how do we incentivize the general public? You mentioned Jordan Peterson. So where do we find more of these kind of narratives that are positive for not just respecting men, but loving them?
To understand what the solution is, we have to understand what the problem is. And the problem is the male power female victimization paradigm. That gender paradigm is the source of all our gender political woes for both men and women. So one of the things we really need to understand in order to incentivize all this, to sell it to the general public, is an understanding that all of this is actually victimizing women. Okay, here's a mistake that I think that the MRIs make. They look into all these feminist issues and they're bankrupt, right? The glass ceiling and the pay gap and gender-based pricing and oh my God, all these things, they're just bankrupt. I mean, there's nothing there, for heaven's sake. Those are just all female choices. So the MRAs tend to assume, therefore, that there really is no victimization of women. But just because feminism does not address the true victimization of women doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that, of course, feminism doesn't address the truest victimization of women because feminism is the primary perpetrator. Here's a quote, Camille Paglia. She says, men have sacrificed for women and children, including their lives, for thousands of years. This sick portrayal of human history as nothing but male oppression and female victimage, this is a way to permanently ensure the infantilization of women. Dead on, okay? To me, the truest victimization of women begins with the withhold of accountability, which is a withhold of respect. Respect for women's power, efficacy, weaponry, equal partnership in the human system. It is drowning women in sympathy, poor thing. It is telling women that all fault is male, which instills poisonous self-righteousness in women. It is telling women that there's a boogeyman behind every bush, which is frightening. It is telling women falsely that their legacy is nothing more than property and chattel. It is telling women that their biology only betrays them, which tends to cause women to low prioritize marriage, home, family, children, limiting women's immersion within roles and realms in which many women are their happiest. And let's not forget that it is the world of women. It is the world of women that feminism has shamed and disparaged and diminished. So all over the world, it's just no surprise. Every measure of female happiness is plummeted, and all over the world, the most feminist cultures produce the least happy women.
Let's talk about National Coalition for Men. And I know that you were the president of the Chicago chapter. I believe you still are.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what National Coalition for Men is and what you have done with the group?
Well, the National Coalition for Men is an active group. I'll call it men's issues activists. I think is a little more positive and palatable term. NCFM has been around for a long, long time, and it's more than just a forum for complaint. It is a real mover shaker kind of organization that has done battle with feminism in the courts. It is blessed with superior, wonderful leadership. It is fighting the good fight in the best way it can.
Can you tell me a big success the National Coalition for Men that you can think of in your lifetime?
The Carolina chapter did an amazing job of working its way up the ladder until it connected with Betsy DeVos and convinced her that preponderance of the evidence standard of adjudication is unconstitutional and unjust. And she fought against it. Mark Angelucci and others within NCFM contributed to changing the selective service to include women in the draft. So those are a couple of big victories for NCFM.
Well, I think that NCFM is around, and I think everyone who's a part of that, I mean, they're discussing now about women in the draft. So I know that we have a big thank you for NCFM for even getting the conversation into Congress. Even if they didn't directly get this one in there, they've been pushing. So, but I want to talk to you about your mentoring of boys and helping them become men. Can you give us an explanation of what that's like and what kind of things you teach boys?
Well, actually, that was a long time ago, back when that was more possible to do. I'm not sure that you could do that within high schools anymore. This was something we did at a private high school where it was a program that lasted for years, where myself and others in the New Warrior organization, the Mankind Project, were invited into a high school, and we tried to sort of initiate boys into manhood, teaching about personal accountability and integrity. Back then, it was still possible to teach boys to appreciate masculinity and all the positives, the gold within it. That might be more difficult to do now than it was then. There was a little less paranoia about, accusations back then than there is now. And yeah, in some ways things have gotten worse instead of better.
One thing that comes immediately to mind is that men's spaces tend to be eroded and they're interfered with and outright banned sometimes, depending on what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So what is that? So do you have any thoughts pertaining to that? And is there any way we can salvage men's spaces?
I think the best way to present male perspectives, facts, and truths is to present them as that which goes on the other end of a balance beam. This is where I come from. This is equalist rhetoric. This is how I work. This is how I get men's issues into the discussion. Is by saying, okay, so feminism addresses this half of gender reality. I'd like to address the other half of gender reality now. So that I as much as possible, I try not to discredit the opposite, as more as add the other side to it. And I do so not as an end in itself, but rather as a means to an end. In presenting how all of this can lead to a better world. When we realize how victimized women are by all this, it creates an opportunity. this this men have the power, women are the victims narrative has been disastrous all around. Okay, and that creates an opportunity. See, my vision of the men's movement is for men to step up and take leadership, to work the powers they've got, rather than trying to work female power that they don't got, and try and present all this about men being the victims. See, if the general public gets the idea that we're trying to oust women from victim and center seat just so man can sit there instead, we got zero hope of bringing the general public on board with us. So for me, it's all about presenting something better. And to me, that is woman and man calling it even. That's that's coming to a realization that male power is matched by female power, female victimization is matched by male victimization, and therefore what we need is equalism or some other gender-neutral gender politics in which gender issues are viewed as matters of shared responsibility. To me, that it's possible to sell that. It's possible to sell that to the general public. And in so doing, we address directly what is the central problem, which is the belief system. See, I so applaud, I'm not sure if you would even want his name given. I'd be happy to credit him, but he keeps a low profile, so I'm not going to mention his name, but the Carolina chapter of NCFM, they just did a heroic job of getting through to Betsy DeVos and changing that. But you see, it's changed back. In my judgment, you see, as long as we believe men have the power, women are the victims, man bad, over-empowered, oppressor, victimizer, woman good, innocent victim, as long as that nonsense continues to be the sort of official belief system, we can't get the changes that we want.
No, you're absolutely correct right there. But I want to kind of shift a little focus on this, but focusing on your qualitative stuff. I'm going to give you a statement, and I want to get your reaction to it. That feminism has succeeded as it has, starting with their domestic terrorism to get the vote, to the temperance movement, to second wave feminism, third wave, and whatever modern wave we're in now. And that the only reason that this has succeeded is that men have allowed it to succeed.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's a very equalist look at it in my judgment. See, that's looking at things as a matter of male-female equal partnership. Yes, women perpetrated this thing, but men enabled it. So as always, woman and man work together in co-equal, co-partnership, however unconsciously. And yes, men are definitely equally responsible for this whole gender political fiasco that we're in. In lots of ways, actually. Women stood up and said, we are the ultimate victims of the universe, and man did not protest. And, male personae, think, Clark Gable and Dean Martin, and Joe Namath, and whatever. There's this super cool kind of male persona, and that lingers to this day. With like thinking about Ocean's 11, it's just filled with guys like that. There's this, incredibly confident, got the world on a string, and the world is my oyster. All those cliches. Again, how are men responsible for this? So I just talked about the certain male persona that appears to have no problems, that he's always cool, he's always got the answer for everything. And this, though false, was sort of quite compelling in terms of believing that men have the power.
I have a hypothetical question for you. So let's just say that ultimately we do call it even, and equalism has won out.
Yeah.
And let's say that day does come, say, the year 2040. Just make up a year there. So should equalism still be consciously, continuously applied and kept vigilant at all times? Or is it something that's we can forget and let some of the things we've been trying to fight come back right in? I know it's a weird question, but I figured I'd pose it to you.
Well, first of all, in my judgment, everything really constructive, everything that really improves the situation, everything that really changes things for the better begins with woman and man calling it even. And I would say that equalism's goal is not to create equality, it's to maintain equality. Okay, so its job is to scrutinize the public and fight against inequalities. So I mean, equalism would not allow for all these glass escalators that women now enjoy. Okay, so equalism was no, that's not gender equality. To maintain gender equality, that means equal opportunity on a truly even playing field. So no more 1,027 female-centric organizations in this country. No more billions of dollars earmarked for the emotional and financial and professional betterment of women. No more glass escalators, no more quotas, no more affirmative actions, no more Title IX that try to artificially force what I call female-only equality. So equalism would look at the situation and say, well, if women maintain primacy, say, through beauty, grace, goodness, home, family, parenting, all these different things, well, then that has to be balanced by what men have. So the task then would be to maintain what I'll call balanced equality, as opposed to what I'll call unisex equality, which would be to render the sexes identical.
Well, speaking to Vernon's question, in this hypothetical world that he's described and you've described, would this just be like individuals just saying that we need to do it, or would there be some sort of government committee like the National Organization of Women doing their White House Council for Women? Do we have a similar council for equalism?
Yeah, perhaps. And equalism could be taught in school. Look, it would all it'd be taught that the gender reality is mirrored. Men more respected but less loved, women more loved but less respected. Men seem somehow more important, women seem somehow more valuable. On the one hand, you have male ego, on the other, female pride. And you teach the glass ceiling, and then the mirror opposite of the glass floor. So you'd look at how the glass floor has always tended to safeguard women from sinking to the extreme bottom of like mine shafts, prison cells, and coal mines and whatever, right? So equalism would teach these things side by side and show how they balance each other out, and how woman and man have always been equal partners in this whole thing. Equalism would be ongoing, though eventually it might simply just be called gender politics. If gender politics could be rendered truly fair and even-handed and knowledgeable of both sides, now as knowledgeable of the politicized male perspective as it is the politicized female perspective, then perhaps you could just call it gender politics and leave it at that.
Well, one thing that I've been noticing is that technology, and the more into the future we go, the more the lid is blown off of these disparities. I think how men aren't the oppressors that they've been called into being and are accused of being. So my question is, do you think the more technology grows, the more our job becomes easier? We can see that men have issues more so because, you mentioned coal mines and stuff. Those are, compared to now, I suppose, men were really involved in like, very, what, for lack of a better term, is sacrificial work. And, but as technology grows, we can account for the workers' lives better. And maybe even women can kind of find themselves able to operate such technology to do similar jobs.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, I'll probably construct this question more as I go if I keep on going. So let's hand it back to you. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that historically, gender polarity was efficient. Back in the brutal past, if we really understand how brutal the past was, how terrible the average levels of poverty and struggle there was for the average human, we now can see then that the primary goal of most humans was survival, and dividing up into men and women as complementary and as a partnership to help each other survive, where each had their role, was efficient. It added a certain extra clarity within a world where we didn't understand anything, pre-science, we didn't know how anything worked. And we're just everything was so mysterious. It kind of helped to have men be men and women be women. And it kind of added a sort of predictability into our world. So these things happen for reasons of efficiency. There was no nefarious motive. So now they're much less necessary. Now, the gender polarity of the past has been dissipating, largely because we just don't need it anymore. And now it becomes a question of, so to what degree is this new androgyny? Is that what happens when we just let go of gender polarity, or is that being socially constructed to some extent? That's a real deep question right there. Really difficult to get at. I think future generations will know the answer to that. But right now we're so immersed in it, it's really difficult to see the forest for the trees on that. But to answer your question, yes, it's a natural progression that, when I started with this, men were what comprised 94% of the work-related fatalities. Now it might be down to 90%, depending on the source. I'm not sure, but there's definitely at least been some shift on that. So everything in gender is in flux, and we are tending more toward a sort of unisex gender reality, and it's very difficult to tell, is that a good thing or what exactly? I mean, it's a really, really tough call. How real is it? Because I note that the little boys are being shamed for their masculine, right? I mean, they're just being told the masculine is the source of all evil and war and rape and all things terrible. And meanwhile, the little girls are being told that their femininity is doormat and second sex and, all things weak and feeble. So it's only natural that the boys are going to tend to want to sort of purge this evil masculine, and the girls are going to tend to want to purge this passive feminine. And so within certain liberal quarters, you can see that the feminine really only gets approval when it's displayed by the boys, and masculine only really gets approval when it's displayed by the girls. So is that a social construction then? Is that, are we pressuring this? You know, these are deep questions, important questions.
When you're describing equalist, it almost sounds like it's very similar to traditional conservative or trad cons. And many people think if we went back 100 years ago, where men and women were basically working together pretty much because they didn't have a choice, but there was some sort of symbiosis there.
Yeah.
Would that be your ideal of equalist of going back?
No.
Or do you need to go forward?
No, equalism is radical. Equalism is a radical change. Loving men, respecting women, it sounds innocuous, but it's actually totally radical. Society has never even considered having real empathy toward men. It has never considered holding women truly accountable as powerful. These are absolutely transformative notions. So no, this is not going backwards. This is a different form of liberalism. Okay, so this is liberalism as embracing something truly progressive that human society has never considered. Men have the power, women are the victims. That's as old as the hills. In that sense, feminism is saying, you know, that the earth is even flatter than heretofore suspected. There's nothing radical about men have the power, women are the victims. What's radical is the idea that women have power and men are victims. Women have power and abuse power and have an equal human shadow. These are radical notions. That men are vulnerable. The men suffer sexism and disadvantage and are very vulnerable to it and vulnerable to female power. See, these are all actually radical ideas.
I definitely agree with you on that. And I kind of already knew the answer to that question when I asked you, but I wanted to.
I appreciate you asking because, yeah, people could very definitely get that impression. Thanks.
So that's going to end it for us today. I feel like we could do a video for 5 hours just listening to you talk because you have some very great insights. So I thank you for coming out this year for ICMI. And
Thank
we're
you.
going to go ahead and get going. Do you have any last things you want to say real quick?
In the realms of gender activism and gender conflict and complaint, advocacy, gender defining, gender issues, gender studies, gender politics, gender anything. There's feminism on the one hand, and on the other hand, there's kind of like nothing. Feminism is an ideological dictatorship and needs to be taken down as such.
Powerful words.
Yeah, brilliant answer.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I thank you so much, Tim, and I hope you have a great night.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Vernon.
Thank you.
Awesome to talk with you.